Most buyers assume that new means safe, that modern construction means better than before, that a recognizable brand guarantees quality. But what happens when you slow down, open a hatch, and look into the places that do not appear in brochures? Unsealed plywood, sloppy electrical connections, exposed edges that can cut or corrode. This isn't just one model or one brand, it's a pattern across the boats being shown and sold right now. To understand how this became normal, we need to start with what's hiding under the deck. The illusion of brand new. Most people walk into a dealership or a boat show believing that a new boat is automatically a safe bet. New means dependable, new means clean, modern, and worry-free. The lights, the music, and the smell of fresh vinyl all sell that idea perfectly. You see a familiar logo, the gel coat glows under spotlights, and the salesperson tells you this model is built to last. In that moment, no one is thinking about the parts they cannot see, the wiring, the bilge, the bulkheads buried under deck panels. The quiet assumption is simple. If it is new, it must be right. That assumption is what keeps the industry running smoothly, and it is also what lets so many shortcuts slide by unnoticed. Because when you move past the showroom floor and start opening panels, the shine wears off fast. The truth begins in the spaces that are hardest to reach, the places where most buyers never look until something breaks. We saw it firsthand. At a recent show, a small deck boat caught our attention. It looked fine from a distance, decent seating, modern console, neat layout. But the moment we lifted the rear hatch, everything changed. There it was, a raw plywood bulkhead. Edges completely unsealed, screw holes already cracking around the fittings, the surface flexed under light pressure, and the sound it made said everything creaking wood on a boat that had barely touched water. This was not an old trade-in or a neglected leftover. It was a brand new model from a well-known manufacturer, displayed proudly under banners and bright lights. The same design that countless families would look at as their first boat, their weekend escape, their reward. Yet here it was, built with unprotected wood and sent straight to the show floor. As if that was acceptable. There is nothing inherently wrong with using wood in boats. Done right, laminated and fully encapsulated, it can last decades. Done wrong, as in this case, it becomes a ticking clock. Water finds the open edges, soaks in, and begins to rot from the inside out. Once that happens, repairs are costly, and hidden damage is nearly impossible to detect early. The real question is not why one builder let this happen. It is why so many do, and why buyers keep letting them. Because if a company is confident enough to show this level of work in public, imagine what is hidden in the compartments no one can open, behind consoles no one checks, or below decks sealed off from easy inspection. That single boat became a pattern. As we walked through the rest of the show, the same signs kept appearing: unfinished fiberglass, poorly sealed seams, wiring that looked rushed. It was not a one-off mistake. It was a quiet standard. And that realization is where the real story starts. The plywood problem on brand new boats. A little later, we stepped onto a small bow rider from another big brand that has been around for a long time. Same thing. On the surface, shiny gel coat, nice graphics, clean cockpit. This is the type of boat a lot of families picture when they say, "Let us get something new for the lake." We opened up a compartment in the bow. Again, plywood, not composite board, not properly encapsulated core, plain wood with a screw driven right through the face, already cracking the surface. You could see where water is going to travel along that crack, soak into the grain, and start the clock ticking on rot. This is how it goes. First a little discoloration, then softness, then separation. And the worst part is that the owner will probably not see it until the boat is out of warranty. The dealer shrugs. And the only solution is to cut and replace. Wood is not the problem. Rushed construction is. Open edges, no sealing on cuts, no resin around screw penetrations. On a new boat, that is not a mistake. That is a choice. Now you might think, okay, maybe that is just the cheaper models. Maybe the nicer brands are better behind the scenes. So we kept walking, and it did not take long to find the next set of surprises. Raw fiberglass, dry laminate, and edges that should have been finished. We climbed onto a jet boat from a manufacturer that, honestly, we used to respect a lot more. We have seen their boats at previous shows, and the quality looked decent back then. This time, we opened a hatch and just stared for a second. Inside this cavity, instead of a smooth, finished surface, we found raw, dry fiberglass. You could see areas where they laid woven reinforcement directly onto a gel-coated surface without grinding it back to raw glass. You could see strands of glass that never got fully wetted out with resin, literally sticking off the surface like hair. Some of that laminate was supposed to be structural. If you are not familiar with fiberglass work, here is the short version. When you do structural layup, you want glass on glass. You want the new material to bond into a properly prepared surface, not just sit on top of slick gel coat. And you absolutely do not want dry spots. Dry glass is not bonded, it is just sitting there. Over time, it can separate, crack, and make noise. This was not hidden inside some old project in a yard. This was on a brand new boat, at a major show, in a place you can see just by opening a hatch and shining a light. We walked to the same model, different hull, checked again. Same story. When you see that, you start to realize this is not just one missed spot. This is a pattern. And once you see one pattern, you start looking even closer at everything else that is running through the guts of these boats. The wiring and plumbing that will come back to haunt you. The bilge is where the truth really lives. That is where the pumps, fuel lines, steering hydraulics, wiring harnesses, and drains all meet up. It is also where a lot of manufacturers seem to hope you never look. We stepped into the back of one center console and pulled open an access hatch to see how they routed the wiring and hoses. First thing we noticed was a bunch of heat shrink connectors, just hanging there, not actually shrunk. Someone slid them onto the wires, crimped them, and then never applied heat. That means the connection is not properly sealed. Moisture can get in, corrosion can get going. A little deeper in, we saw a main battery ground with bare copper exposed, past the end of the insulation, nothing covering it, ready to turn green and crusty the first season it lives in salt water. Wires were draped over sharp edges instead of supported and secured. On another boat, we looked at fuel lines rubbing directly against rough, untrimmed fiberglass. Imagine that boat pounding through chop for a few seasons, everything vibrating. That hose keeps moving against that sharp texture over and over, until one day you notice a fuel smell, or, in the worst case, you have a leak you cannot see. Same thing with hydraulic steering lines. We found lines resting against rough fiberglass corners, where the builder never bothered to radius and seal the edges. You do not want the one thing that controls your steering chafing on a razor every time you head out. These are not cosmetic issues. These are things that turn into real problems for real owners in real conditions. Yet, they show up again and again on boats that are being sold as brand new and ready to go. And it is not just the hidden areas. You can see the mindset spill into the visible hardware and layout too. Before we keep going, I want to hear from you, because your experience actually shapes what we cover next. If you have questions about a specific brand, model, or something weird you found on a boat you looked at, drop it in the comments and ask away. We read through those and often build future videos around the patterns we see there. And if this is helping you spot things you never would have noticed before, hit like so more buyers get the same heads up, and subscribe so you do not miss the follow-up videos where we show you the boats that actually get it right. Design and hardware. That just does not make sense. You can tell a lot about how a boat is built by how it treats the little things. We stepped onto one small center console that, from a distance, looked sharp. Nice lines, decent T-top, good color on the hull. Then we walked up to the console and realized the top had been spaced up with random blocks to make the frame fit. Instead of designing the console and top to match, they just stacked material until the bolts lined up. It worked, but it looked like a last-minute fix instead of something engineered from the start. They had rod holders on the sides of the console, which is great, except the console was so narrow that you physically could not stand a rod straight in those holders without hitting the T-top structure. It is almost like the people who designed the console never actually tried to put a rod there. The windshield on that same boat was so small and so low that if you stood at the helm, it blocked exactly nothing. The wind was going straight into your face. It was a windshield in the sense that a clear piece of plastic was there, but not in the sense of actually shielding anything. In the aft, we opened a small hatch and found the cheapest possible hinge. No support, no gas strut, No soft close, nothing. When we let it drop, the entire boat echoed. That kind of detail may not seem like a big deal, but when you are paying serious money for a new boat, those things add up. A little strip of weather stripping, a better hinge, a simple gas assist. None of that costs thousands of dollars at the factory level. It just requires someone to care enough to spec it. So why are so many boats showing this same pattern of good from far, rough up close? There are reasons, and they are not always mysterious. Why so much sloppy work is slipping through? The first thing to understand is that boats are more expensive to build than ever. Materials, labor, shop space, insurance, everything went up. At the same time, a lot of brands are trying to hold certain price points because that number on the tag is what pulls a buyer into the conversation. That tension has to go somewhere. Somewhere, something has to give. And too often, what gives is the time spent on finishing, on quality control, on the stuff that you do not see in a brochure picture. A lot of these boats are built on production lines that are under pressure to push units out. You have crews that might be newer, still learning, maybe moving fast to hit quotas. The difference between trimming fiberglass edges smooth and just sending the part as is might be a few minutes per piece. The difference between properly heat shrinking every connector and just crimping and moving on might be a few seconds per joint. Those seconds and minutes add up over hundreds of boats. If management is staring at build time and cost, it gets tempting to shave those corners. And they know most buyers are never going to pull a panel and crawl into the bilge before they sign the paperwork. That does not mean every manufacturer is doing things wrong. There are good builders out there. In fact, at this same show, we saw some boats that genuinely impressed us, but the pattern on the mass-produced side is hard to ignore. So if you are a buyer, the question becomes very simple. How do you protect yourself? How do you make sure you are not the one discovering these shortcuts the hard way after the first season? You do it by refusing to shop like a brochure reader and by starting to shop like a surveyor. How to inspect a new boat, so you actually know what you are buying. If you are serious about buying a new boat, you need to dress like you are going to work, not like you are going to a party. Wear clothes you can kneel in. Bring a small flashlight. If the salesperson looks at you funny when you start opening hatches, that tells you something right there. Here is where we always start. Step 1. Open every hatch you can reach. Under seats, in the floor, in the transom, inside the console. Anywhere there is a latch, open it. When you look inside, do not just glance. Run your hand along the edges. Do you feel sharp, hairy fiberglass, or does it feel smooth and finished? Sharp edges are not just uncomfortable. They are a sign that whoever finished that boat did not take the extra steps to clean things up. Look for exposed wood. If you see plywood, look at the edges. Are they sealed and encapsulated, or are they raw and thirsty? Check around screws. Are you already seeing cracks in the wood where the screw went in? That is not a good sign on a boat that is supposedly brand new. Step 2, find the bilge. Every boat has one. Sometimes the access is terrible, but there is always a way in. Open the hatch, crouch down, and shine your light. Look at the wiring. Are the runs tidy and supported, or are wires just hanging wherever they landed? Do you see heat shrink connectors that are actually shrunk and sealed, or are they just loose plastic tubes crimped onto a wire and left open on the end? Do the wires pass over sharp edges, or do they have proper grommets and supports? Look at the fuel lines and hydraulic lines. Are they secured and routed in a way that keeps them away from rough surfaces? Or are they draped across bare fiberglass and metal with nothing in between? If they are touching anything sharp, picture that contact happening thousands of times in waves. Step 3. Check drainage. Put your eyes on every through hull and every drain you can find. If you see a rod holder in a place where water will go in, look for a hose running from that holder to somewhere it can drain safely. If there is no hose, that water is going straight into whatever is underneath. Look for standing water in compartments. If the boat is sitting level at a show and there are a few inches of water in a locker that has a drain, ask why it is not going anywhere. That might sound small, but trapped water is how rot, mold, and smells start. Step 4. Test the hardware. Open and close hatches. Do they slam like a car door with no weather stripping? Or do they close with a solid, damped feel? Wiggle seat backs and leaning posts. Do they flex in ways that make you nervous? Or do they feel solid? If you go through those simple steps on a few boats in a row, you are going to start seeing differences very quickly. Some will surprise you in a good way, others will make you want to step off and keep walking. And that is the point, because there are builders out here who are doing it right, and they deserve to be noticed. Builders who still do it right. To keep this balanced, we need to be clear. This show is not all horror stories and bad surprises. Mixed in with the rushed work and rough finishes, there were boats that genuinely made us stop, look at each other, and nod in a good way. Those are important to talk about too, because they prove that better work is still possible at today's prices. One center console from a smaller builder stood out immediately. We opened the bilge hatch, expecting another round of the same issues, and instead, we just stood there for a moment, quietly, for the opposite reason. The wiring was routed in clean, organized looms, supported every few inches instead of drooping wherever gravity took it. Every single heat shrink connector we could see was properly shrunk and sealed. The terminations looked like someone actually cared whether those connections would still be solid after years in a saltwater environment. The fuel lines were not just thrown into the space and tied here and there. They were neatly routed, with gentle bends instead of kinks, and secured with proper clamps on fixed structure. Hydraulic lines were mounted in a way that kept them away from sharp edges and moving parts. You could almost read the thought process in the layout. What happens to this line after 10 years of vibration? That is a very different mindset from simply, will this pass a quick glance today? We ran our hands along the inside of the compartments, and what we felt was smooth, finished surfaces. No raw glass itching your skin, no razor edges waiting for a forearm. Hatches opened and closed with a solid, damped feel. The bulkheads were composite, not bare plywood, and wherever something had been cut or drilled, the edges were sealed. Screw penetrations were properly bedded instead of just driven dry into structure. It all added up to a simple impression. Somebody has climbed into this space before you ever will and asked, is this going to hold up for the person who owns this boat? The price tag on that boat was not cheap. It was not a bargain bin special, but it was right in line with a lot of bigger, more famous names on the same floor that were cutting obvious corners underneath. That is what really stood out. You do not always have to pay 3 times more to get better work. Sometimes you just have to look past the logo on the side and inspect how the boat is actually built. We also saw a few up-and-coming brands that seem to understand that buyers are starting to pay attention. They are leaning into full composite construction, not just as a marketing phrase, but in the details you can see when you open things up. Clean gel coat in hidden areas, access panels that are actually usable, and hardware that feels like it belongs on a serious boat, instead of something built to hit the lowest possible cost. Those are the builders we are interested in highlighting in other videos. This is not about tearing down an entire industry. It is about drawing a clear line and saying, this is what good looks like. This is what you should expect when you spend this kind of money. And that naturally leads to the last piece of this, because the difference between more of that good work and more of the bad work is going to come down to one thing: how buyers choose to use the power they already have. Raising the standard. Manufacturers, like most companies in any industry, will continue doing whatever the market quietly allows. Boats are no different. If buyers keep walking into shows, falling for the shine, signing contracts without ever opening a hatch, and then simply living with whatever they get, there is very little incentive for big brands to change anything. The boats still move. The margins still hold. On paper, the system works. The only real pressure that forces improvement does not come from marketing departments or trade shows. It comes from buyers who decide to stop treating a new boat like a sealed mystery box. That starts with doing exactly what we have been doing throughout this video. Opening hatches, looking into the bilge, checking the wiring, and asking direct questions when something does not look right. It means being willing to say very clearly, this is not acceptable at this price, and it needs to be fixed before I sign. You are allowed to make a list. In fact, you should. Loose or unsupported wiring, unfinished fiberglass edges, missing drain hoses, exposed or unprotected wood, messy caulking in critical areas, write all of it down. Present that punch list to the dealer. and insist that every item is addressed properly, in writing, before delivery. If they refuse, you can walk away. That is not being difficult. That is protecting yourself from problems that will be yours, not theirs, after the check clears. When only one person does this, it can be dismissed as a picky customer. When enough people do it, it turns into market feedback, and companies, even very large ones, listen to markets. Warranty costs, canceled deals, and repeated complaints have a way of showing up in internal reports. That is often when construction details quietly start to change. You also have another, very simple form of leverage. You can change brands. If you see the same issues from one manufacturer over and over, poor finishing, the same shortcuts under different model names, you do not have to buy their boats. There are builders trying to do the right thing, even under the same economic pressures. When you reward those builders with your business, you send just as strong a message as when you call out bad work. After a full day on the show floor, a clear pattern started to emerge. We saw some boats that were genuinely well built, and we saw many that hid rough work under a clean exterior, exposed plywood where there should have been sealed, composite, raw fiberglass, where hands and hoses will eventually go, and systems installed in ways that are almost guaranteed to cause headaches if nothing is corrected. If you are thinking about buying a new boat, treat this as a quiet, practical warning. Do your own inspection. Open every hatch they will let you open. Look, touch, and ask questions. Make the builder earn your money, instead of assuming that the word new automatically means done right. If you have your own experience, good or bad, or a specific brand or model you are unsure about, drop it in the comments and ask. We read those, and they shape what we dig into next. If this helped you see things differently before you buy, hit like so more buyers get the same heads up, and subscribe if you want to see future breakdowns of both the boats that worry us and the ones we would actually trust.